in at least science fiction romance, the best marketing, the most reliable marketing is cross-promotion with other authors in that genre. So if you and I both wrote it, if I said, hey, I love your book, could I put it in my newsletter? I know that my newsletter subscribers will like it because it's in that genre or something like that. So with the 11 authors, even just promoting it across our own audiences, we're already doing fairly well. But it also gives us a way to say, don't know if you like science fiction romance? Well, here's a nice way here's a smorgasbord for you to try and see if you like them and that kind of
thing. Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you. But navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to the latest episode of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. You'll notice I said the latest episode and not episode 215, which I think it is, but just in case I made a mistake, and it's actually a different episode number. Is it 214? Is it 215? I can't remember. Maybe that gives you a bit of an idea of where my head is at right now. I'll get to that later in my personal update, to be quite honest with you. But let's get to the important thing. The important thing is that in today's episode, I have a chat with Carol Van Natta, who's a USA Today bestselling and award-winning science fiction and fantasy author. Her series include the Central Galactic Concordance space opera series and the Ice Age Shifters Paranormal Romance series. She is also the editor of the Pets in Space 6 science fiction romance anthology, and we talk a lot about that anthology and author collaboration and so much more. And that's coming up later in this episode. First, instead of an ad read from me for this episode's sponsor, Findaway Voices, I'm going to play a very short clip from a self-publishing insider's live chat with Drafted Digital, featuring Kevin Tumlinson and I in our conversation with Will Dagus from Findaway Voices, talking about the most recent announcement of Marketplace. But I thought, why not a fun short clip from Will himself, because it's fresh off the press from yesterday, which would have been, what was that, October 7th? Thursday, October 7th, 2021. So here's that word from Findaway Voices.
Marketplace is much more of an open market, right? Okay. Anybody can sign up for Findaway Voices Marketplace and put their samples out there and set their rates. You know, everybody's an independent contractor. They can choose whatever rate they want there. Nice. For the productions that we do, you can be confident that nobody's going to be on a casting list that isn't trustworthy, that isn't going to meet quality standards that we've vetted. But Marketplace is going to give you a lot more freedom to just pick anyone in the world. So there's going to inherently be a little bit more risk there for authors. Okay. But we've worked really hard on building up a set of trust tools. So, we're thinking strategically about Marketplace a year ago. We're thinking, what are the core pillars of what we want to build? And trust and transparency was one of the big pillars for us. We don't want somebody to just be able to sign up and say they're Morgan Freeman, right? Yeah. Like there has to be a little bit more trust and transparency there. So a couple of the things that we're doing is at the end of every production, the author will be able to rate the narrator will be able to rate the author. So both sides are going to have ratings and reviews. Okay. We're going to show you how long any narrator has been signed up on Findaway Voices. We're going to show you whether they've been used for a production that we've trusted them for in the past. If they've been hired by us either for an AudioWorks production, which is our high-end studio division, or an Orange Sky, which is our publishing division, or through our managed productions with Findaway Voices over the last 4 years. So you'll get to see that Findaway has trusted them. You'll also get to see how many minutes they've recorded on our platform. Right? So they can't just say like, hey, well, I've done 10 books for Findaway, and it's like 10 1-minute books, right? So like trust and transparency is key there. Also elevating things like how often do they deliver on time? 95% of my projects were delivered on the due date or before. Those kind of transparency metrics are built into the very core foundation of Marketplace because we are opening it up to the whole world, and we want authors to make informed decisions when they're making these expensive decisions.
I love that. So you're also allowing a new narrator who has skill, but maybe doesn't have the previous experience. They have an opportunity to really use this platform and leverage it to get a foothold in the industry, provided they do it in a professional fashion. Then they can rise up, right?
Absolutely. This is it, for a narrator who has no work samples, right? They may be very talented. They may be an actor who is, in between jobs there and has good studio setup. They just don't have a backlog of audiobooks. They may be great. Even in that scenario, it's tough for them to get our attention on a casting list because we really focus on choosing talent that we know and we trust, and we vet them based on their past experience. So it's really hard to get a foothold in the industry in that way. Marketplace, we really hope, is going to grow the industry, both for narrators and authors, giving everybody a lot more opportunity.
Just a bit of information from Will about Findaway Voice's new marketplace, which I love. It's opening it up. It's more opportunity for narrators and authors. And if you want to see how you can leverage Findaway Voices as an author or even a narrator, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. And there'll also be a link to that full YouTube video over at starkreflections.ca.
Okay, now that was funny. I went to add a little clip at the end of Will's thing, and because the clip was recorded at a different speed, and then I recorded my audio in the very same track, I'm using Audacity for this. It's hilarious that my voice came back sounding like a munchkin, or that I was on nitrous oxide, or maybe helium. Who knows what drugs? No, I'm not. But anyways, I thought it was funny, so I thought I'd just leave it in there. But, you don't get those kinds of audio mistakes when you use some of the professional narrators over at Findaway Voices, because unlike me, they know what they're doing. I'm going to rush through comments. I'm just going to read a recent comment. Recent meaning like within the last hour as I'm recording this. And there was a comment on Twitter from Edwin Downward who said, "No Stark Reflections in my feed yet, but I did get to hear him talk about the new book, The Relaxed Author, co-written with Joanna Penn, on the Six Figure Authors podcast." I'm actually going to respond to that comment in my personal update. That's only because I just want to play another bumper. Okay, so, Edwin, you caught me with my pants down. So normally I produce, I do the editing, produce the episodes on Thursdays, and usually it gets into the RSS feed anytime between 6 and 10 p.m. Thursday evenings. And then I usually have the show notes ready to go, and they appear at about 12:01 a.m. at starkreflections.ca. Now, there have been several times, of course, where the podcast episode may not go up right away, or may go up first thing Eastern morning, which would be anywhere between 6 and 8 a.m. on the Friday. Show notes and the RSS feed, etc. So, folks like Edwin, of course, have gotten used to waking up probably on Friday mornings and saying, "Hey, it's in my feed." That didn't happen, which I'll get to. But Edwin did mention that I was a guest on a recent episode of the Six Figure Authors podcast, and it was supposed to be Joanna and I, and because of the recording times, which was kind of like later in the evening Pacific time, that would have been like 2 or 3 in the morning for Jo, and again, she was doing a lot of traveling, and so she wasn't able to do it. So I just did the interview. Not quite as good as if Jo would have been with me, of course, because she is so awesome. But I think I did okay, and I had a fantastic time talking with Andrea and Lindsay and Joseph. Great folks. If you're not a fan of the Six Figure Author podcast, it is really a great one. I love the dynamics that the three of them have, and it was a good interview, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. But so Edwin, aren't you glad that at least they were on the ball? Because I woke up this morning with an email from Lindsay saying, "Hey, your episode went live last night." And jokingly, my boss at Draft Digital, Dan Wood, commented in Slack this morning when I woke up, because he listened to that episode last night when it went into the feed. And I joked because I revealed something cool about that's coming up later this month in October 2021 from Draft Digital. And don't worry, I'll tell you. But then I said, I'll probably get in trouble for this. And Dan jokingly said, "You're in trouble." When I basically said that Books to Read, Drafted Digital, is going to be offering a lot more enhanced analytics on when people are clicking your Books to Read. So right now it only shows you the top 3. stores that people click, and it's for all time. And it doesn't show you a lot more integrated analytics that are there. And I have, as an author myself, long wanted, and I know other authors long want. So that's something really exciting that is going to be moved into production. So it should be there by the end of October if everything turns out well. Of course, with development, you never can tell. They can discover weird things or side effects, so it obviously has to be tested. But yeah, so I thought I would reveal that on the Six Figure Author podcast, because why not just let people know some of the cool things that are coming. But anyways, that was with my draft to digital hat on. Let me remove that and put my Stark Publishing hat back on. And this is sort of still Edwin, comment to Edwin. So Thursday was a crazy day for me in terms of meetings and commitments and work I was doing with draft to digital. In the evening on Thursday, I was teaching a workshop, a second of two workshops I was teaching on how to write true ghost stories, and I was doing that for Brantford Public Library. So Wednesday night, Eastern Time, I did a 1-hour session that I gave some homework to the attendees, and then on Thursday, I finished off a little bit more detailed presentation, and we kind of walked through some of the homework bits so people could talk about those ideas. And so the Thursday evening is usually when I do the final work. And by the time I finished being on for an hour and engaging with the authors and interacting and stuff like that, I was exhausted. On top of that, massive toothache that started last weekend, just shortly after I put out last week's episode, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And I have not been to a dentist in 3 years. Now, I moved from Hamilton to Waterloo at the beginning of 2018, and so my last dental visit with my dentist in Hamilton, and there's only about an hour drive between the two cities if you're not familiar with them, hadn't gone to see my dentist since then, and everything was fine up until now, and then the pain started. And so Liz has a really great dentist who accepts chickens like me, because she's a chicken herself, or at least has a lot of anxiety. I have a really bad gag reflex, so that's the issue I have at the dentist. Otherwise, it's not like I'm terrified of the dentist or anything. I'm just a little bit anxious. So thank goodness they have nitrous oxide. Wow, I'm not on nitrous oxide right now, by the way. I'm just, speaking. And among some of the other issues that they found, a couple chipped tooth pieces, filling that came out, some other work that needs to be done. But I need to have a root canal, and that explains the intense pain that was keeping me up at night for several days over the last few days. I have to have a root canal. And so he gave me some antibiotics, and he gave me some nice painkillers. So no, I'm not on nitrous oxide, but there may be some really strong painkillers flowing through my system as I record this. But because of the pain from the tooth, because I was teaching a workshop last night when I normally would have been finalizing the episode and doing all those clips, Edwin, you caught me with my pants down. So it's been crazy. But I did want to give another personal update kind of related to Edwin's comment. So Andrea Pearson and I, along with Joanna Penn, along with Sasha Black, along with Craig Martell, along with, oh my God, I can't even name all of the awesome people who are part of this story bundle. It's a NaNoWriMo 2021 story bundle. It is, I believe it's 16 books plus a 50% off coupon for Juto, which is basically software that you can use for managing a website, I believe. And and it's basically, you can get all of them, including the Relaxed Author, for one low price. I think it's $20 for the entire lot. So imagine that. Not only getting the Relaxed Author, or even if you have half a dozen of the books in the collection, there's such an amazing collection of books. I'll mention it in a future podcast episode, because this is going to be running throughout October and November. So it's an extra long story bundle. So no urgency to get it, but come on, for $20 you get all of those goodies? Are you kidding me? Even if, that would be like, 4 or 5, maybe buying four ebooks or 5 ebooks, depends. I'm assuming they're going to be about an average of $5 each. So that's not bad. So Andrea and I were in that bundle. And then as we were recording the Six Figure Author podcast, we joked at the end and went, "Oh man, we forgot to mention that we're both in this story bundle together." So that's something you can check out. Of course, there will be a link to that story bundle over at Stark Reflections in the show notes. But yeah, so personal updates. Working really hard trying to get Fright Nights Big City worked on. Also, a really awesome collaboration that I'm going to be working on a novella with a dear friend of mine in November, and I'm giving a genre that I have never written before a try. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I have so much going on in October, because October is always crazy for people who write scary stories and horror and things like that. And so I've booked in with a lot of radio programs and different virtual events like that. And again, there's October 16th, sci-fi and fantasy. I forgot about this. Carrie Flanagan, who has been a guest on the show, it's a one-day virtual science fiction conference, and I'm doing a talk on publishing pitfalls for authors. And I know my good friend Julie E. Cherneda, Canadian science fiction legend Julie Cherneda, Aurora Award winner, or Best Novel of the Year last year, and many other awards in her past. But incidentally, Julie was the first editor. She was editing an anthology, my very first professional sale. And a professional sale is 6 cents US a word or higher. Back in the day, 6 cents a word was really solid professional rates for a short story. So my very first short story professional. And I remember going to meet with Julie at a Chapters in Hamilton. My parents were in town. My dad and I went to see Julie. And I remember my dad was hanging out outside because he was smoking back then. And you could only smoke when you were sitting at a table outside. You couldn't go smoke in the bookstore because, paper catches fire and stuff. And yeah, that was a really cool moment, because I remember I was like, yeah, my dad was there when I signed my contract for my very first, because I think Julie was in town doing a book signing, and I met up with her, and I went and signed the contract, and that was kind of a pretty cool deal. But anyways, Julie Cherneda is one of the other authors doing an amazing talk for this virtual conference. And again, there'll be a link to that in the show notes over at starkreflections.ca. But I am rambling. But you're used to that, dear listener, aren't you? You are used to my rambling. Thank you so much for listening. Why don't we stop with my rambling? And why don't we hear this interview, this conversation that I had with Carol? Hey, Carol, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm eager to get into Pets in Space 6, and I'm curious to do a little bit of a background on the previous Pets in Space. But more, before we get into that, I want to do a background on Carol herself. When did you get bitten by the bug that said you had to be a writer?
Well, I and my friends wrote a whole bunch of fan fiction when I was in high school, and I think anybody who has the impulse to write ends up doing that some way or another. And then I read it later and went, oh my goodness, that's really horrible. But it did kind of instill the idea that writing is fun, and writing gives you fun creative outlet. And then life happened and all that stuff. And I co-wrote a book with a friend in like the late 80s. Okay. And we shopped it, and it's just this silly ass romp, and science fiction, but nobody gets hurt and right. Stuff like that. And it's we shopped it around to all the traditional publishers, and they were like, "Yeah, not enough sex and violence." So we said, okay, well, that was a nice idea. And then Amazon came around and said self-publishing, and we said, yay! So we self-published our book, and we probably sold 37 copies. But it was fun. It's still a fun little romp.
Which is more than most books sell.
Yes, indeed. Particularly in a genre that isn't really in high demand, right. Which is science fiction comedy. So, and then in about 2014, my muse like mugged me in a dark alley and said, "I have a series for you." And so I started with my space opera romance series. And there's rebellion and this big sprawling universe and stuff like that. And so I thought the romance had to be a part of it, because otherwise it's just one of those slit your wrists, oh my God, who dies this time kind of romance or series. And
Right.
there's plenty of places for those, Game of Thrones. But I didn't want to write that. I wanted to write things, where people persevere, and romance gives you that extra dose of hopefulness,
Right.
and at the end of each one. So, and then I also started into paranormal romance, but that was my first book in my series was Overload Flux, and that was published in 2014, 2015, one of the two. I could look it up. I don't remember. And so since then I've got about 14 books out. Not in that series. I also have Paranormal Romance series that
Right.
has like 5 books too. But so that's me. That's my writing journey.
Well, I'm curious. You talked about the fan fiction you did in high school.
Yes.
Was the fan fiction in similar genre, or
It was in Star Trek.
Oh, okay. That's Star Trek fan fiction, but with romance?
Oh, yes. Oh, my God, with romance. Yes, because we shipped everybody. It didn't matter. We were like, oh, yeah, she deserves to have a romance. Who could we pair her with?
Awesome. Cool. I like that. And so you mentioned co-authoring that first book.
Yeah.
Have you co-authored since then, or was that just a one-off?
I have not, but we had actually plotted a second book in that science fiction romp series, but when nobody wanted it, and
Right.
like that, and we just put that away. And it's not really. It's very we call it retro science fiction comedy because we invented the internet in it,
Okay.
and then the internet came, and so all the fun technology toys that we had are like, and they're very passé now.
Right.
So to really make that work, I would have to, put my mindset back in that for all 37 readers. So, yeah.
Now let's get into Pets in Space 6.
Yes.
What is that all about? And it's the 6th one. How come I've never heard of it yet?
Because you've been living in a cave, apparently. So Pets in Space was created by Pauline Jones and Jean Walker, who writes, her pen name is Veronica Scott. And they had this idea that they wanted to do a science fiction romance anthology because science fiction romance is that little genre that could, and they wanted to celebrate it and that sort of thing. And then they thought, well, and then they were kind of looking for a charity aspect for that too, because they just wanted to do more than just put out an anthology and stuff like that. So they found a charity that they really liked called Hero Dogs, and they provide trained dogs for disabled American veterans and first responders. And they loved the charity, and then they said, but how could that be in science fiction? And they said, I know, Pets in Space. So each of the stories involves something to do with a pet. And it's not just like, oh, the hero has a pet, but the pet is actually, a part of the story, either a catalyst or the MacGuffin or something like that. So it's more than just, oh, and look at the cat. And speaking of which, you may hear one. I have cats, and sometimes when I'm speaking for long periods of times, they think that I'm talking to them, and they will come down and have a little conversation. So we'll see.
I'm in a similar boat here. Although one of our dogs, usually when I'm in a conversation, that's when she goes off and gets into mischief because she knows I'm busy.
Yes, it. The thing that you cannot ignore. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. When I heard of Pets in Space, I immediately in my head had that narrator's voice from the Muppet Show, Pigs in Space, but I was saying pets instead.
Yes.
I imagine that's a running joke.
I've done, when I'm promoting my story or something like this. So briefly, I was asked to be in Pets in Space 2, and I had stories in Pets in Space 2, 3, and 5.
Okay.
And so, but when I was promoting, I was going, Pets in Space!
Which we can't help but do. Exactly. Those of us who are familiar with the Muppet Show, at least.
Exactly, and you make, since people are going to do it anyway, you may as well own it, and and make fun and have fun, and none of the stories are terribly angsty and that sort of thing, so that it works.
It almost sounds like is this a mashup? Is there a cozy element to it? Because cozy mysteries usually prominently feature animals, or is that just one?
Not too many. I mean, there's some mysteries in some of the stories over the years, but it's not really a focus. It's you could. Yeah, it's not really. I'm thinking back to all the stories from it I've read, and I'm not coming up with any that were primarily a mystery and then set in science fiction romance world kind of thing.
So Pets in Space 6 is coming out October 2021.
October 5th.
Very soon. Yeah. Actually, it'll be out before this airs.
Oh, okay. So it'll be out and you can go and buy it. Yes.
It's already available.
So it's a limited edition. So we only sell it for a short period of time, and then we take it off the market, and then we return the rights to the authors so that they can do whatever they want with their stories.
How short?
It'll usually go off sale by the end of January.
Okay. So that's just a few months. Wow.
Yeah. It's like 4 months.
Is that how all the rest of the series went?
Yes.
So wait a second. These are short stories, not novellas.
They're novellas usually.
Oh, they are novellas. Okay, so they are something that the author can probably use on their own.
Yeah. They're novellas. And a couple times, Susan Smith, who has a problem writing short. That's S.E. Smith. She'll turn in things that could be definitely called a novel.
Right. That reminds me of the old adage, I didn't have enough time to write anything shorter.
Yes. I think there's a Mark Twain, maybe he picked it up, but he's like, sorry for the long letter, didn't have time to write something shorter.
Yeah. I've encountered that as an anthology editor myself. And speaking of which, now you're in number 5.
So I was in 2, 3, and 5, and then Jean and Pauline decided that they wanted to do something else, and I said, I'd like to take that over, and so I am now the editor, also of Pets in Space 6.
6. Okay, so how does that work? Is it something that's open to submission, or is it something where it's curated very specifically by the editor or editors?
In this case, they have always done it by invitation only, so curated by the editors, and so they find authors who they and they'll go and invite them, and I did the same. So I know authors whose work I admire and would like to be in the story, or I'd like to invite them, and some cases, as you probably well know, it's just nice to have people who are reliable and do what they say they will. And
so is it a case where these are writers obviously already writing in that genre?
Yes.
And then they're invited to submit a story where a pet is obviously a central part of the story? Yeah.
We give them, Pauline and Jean used to do this sort of, and I've kind of codified it a little. I give them a little list of, kind of what we want in the story and what we don't. Okay. So, no, for example, dubious consent or non-consent, and no rape. And things like those are just hard and fast rules, because the Pets in Space brand, as they have created it, is more lighthearted than that. Okay. So none of the death and destruction and, oh, by the way, 2 people live. Okay, fair enough. And when you mentioned that it was novellas or longer in some cases of some authors, but typically an anthology or a typical anthology of short stories would be anywhere from 60,000 to 100,000 words.
What's the rough word count for number 6, for example?
So we have 11 stories and we have about 370,000 words.
So this is a lot. So for a single price, people can
For a
get
single
huge
price.
value that's going to last them a long. That's not just like a few hours of reading.
Right. Yes. They are 11 novellas.
Wow, that
and
is cool.
Most of them, I think all of them in this year's, are in existing universes.
Right.
So S.E. Smith or Honey Phillips or Veronica Scott or me, we've written in our existing universe. And in my case, for example, it's just like a little side trip. And in Cassandra Chandler, it is like the next story, and this is the place you're going to have to go to get it. Right. Or you have to wait until next year when she gets her rights back and she publishes on her own. But
which is not even 6 months. Like, I mean, I know the process of getting this.
Yeah, you could. And some people do publish that fast. Most of us aren't that organized. We don't get around to it.
So, short story anthologies are a hard sell, right? Short fiction. Novella length a lot better, especially because all of the authors have an existing brand. So I want to first talk about the logistics of the reasons why doing an anthology like this is good for, is it 6 authors, did you say?
11.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, because we have like 400,000 words.
Yeah.
so there's 11 authors plus you as editor. Like, is that how that works?
There's 11. So I'm editor and author, and I'm one of the 11.
Okay, cool. So you've got 11 folks that all have their own followings, all have their own universes. So part of this must be that the cross brand marketing, right?
Yes. So in at least science fiction romance, the best marketing, the most reliable marketing, is cross promotion with other authors in that genre. So if you and I both wrote it, if I said, hey, I love your book, could I put it in my newsletter? I know that my newsletter subscribers will like it because it's in that genre or something like that. So with the 11 authors, even just promoting it across our own audiences, we're already doing fairly well. But it also gives us a way to say, don't know if you like science fiction romance? Well, here's a nice way here's a smorgasbord for you to try and see if you like them and that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. Is that, so how does the logistics work? Is there a contract that everyone signs that says, yes, after it's going to go live on this date, it's going to be, the rights come back to you as of this date? Yes. And then the editing itself, as the editor, are you tasked with the line edits, etc., or is it just
the tradition has been, and I kept this tradition, is that they have to submit a professionally edited manuscript, but I still go through and edit because there's always I know that there are typos in this book. Right, yeah.
And they'll never go away. Because the one pets that all writers have that they don't even realize exist are the ones that introduce typos only after you hit the publish button. That is a fact. Okay.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Those that's little gremlins.
And I know that I have done this, and other authors have done the same. They'll write to me at the last possible minute and say, you know that character named John? In all the other books, he was named Jim. Could you fix that for me?
Oh man. So is there a basic contract or a template contract that you guys have used that everyone signs?
Yes. And I modeled it based on the SIFWA contract for short fiction anthologies, and then I've modified it for my purposes for things like, we expect you to do marketing. You can't just drop off your manuscript and say, so long, thanks for all the fish. Yeah. And here are your deadline. Here are your hard and fast deadlines, and we'll want your bio and a blog post and a few other things like this, and we expect these things from you.
So I'm assuming you're thinking of this, the SIFL contract. Often with short fiction, if it's original fiction, there's a payment up front and then no royalty split.
No,
Is this a case of royalty
that's where
split,
where we differ. This is a royalty split.
So it's royalty split. So you're doing royalty splitting, and is there? You mentioned a good cause. The good cause is part of the royalty split.
Yes. So we take 10% of the gross sales for the first month's sales, which also, of course, includes the pre-orders. But readers don't generally understand that pre-orders are the first month's sales because they don't think about it. So we always say 10% of the pre-orders and first month sales goes to Hero Dogs, the wonderful charity. Cool. So we take that off the top. Then we take our costs, like the costs of the cover and, admin and stuff like that off that. And then all the rest of that is split
up. Cool. How do you manage that? Someone gets the sales reports, or like you're publishing number 6 and
I'm publishing
pull out
through my
Excel
publishing
and take
company.
off your shoes and socks and do all the
calculations. But it's not that difficult with a spreadsheet. And I know that there are things like Publish Drive, I think, does will
do the math
manage,
for you.
We'll do the math for you, but it's with a spreadsheet it's not that difficult.
Okay.
So,
and it's only for what, October, November, December,
January,
the full month of January, so it's 4 months basically.
Yes, it's 4 months. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like every month
occasionally we've gone to the end of February if we had a really good opportunity. Like last year, they put us in a story bundle group, so we extended that. The authors had to agree to it, but
of course,
sure. Yes, I think I'll accept some more money. Thank you.
Yes, I won't mind. I wanted to give me some. Okay, and then the authors can do whatever they want. They may publish it as standalones, give it away to their newsletter subscribers, whatever that they want to do.
Bundle it up with another story, whatever. Rewrite it. Some authors have taken it back and expanded it and rewritten it. To make it bigger, or added a epilogue, or something like that.
Is this? I'm assuming it's an ebook, but is there a print book also created for it?
No, we did one print book 1 year. It was small enough, and that thing was a boat anchor.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's going to be like 600 pages, right?
It was the biggest that I think Amazon allowed you to print, and it is a boat anchor. I have one somewhere, and oh my God. And this year, even with just the 11 authors, because we've had 12 and 13 authors in previous anthologies, it's too big to print.
Wow. So I guess the question, one of the reasons probably that you don't leave it available is then somebody's got to do the math every month.
Yes, right? and how long do you keep it? And would people like to have their stories back and do something with them and make them, maybe they wanted to make that a 99-cent thing as a loss, a leader into something else, and then they have to ask the other 11 authors, can we put this on sale?
Right.
That was just like a logistical nightmare that none of us wanted to deal with.
So 2 reasons probably why I had never heard of it. I'm not in the reading demographic, obviously.
Exactly.
But the other thing is they're not available. Like this is the 6th one. And I was thinking, okay, you'd be searching on Amazon, for example, and you'd find the previous editions and go, oh my God, Carol Van Natta, I could get her. Oh, cool. She's in this one and this one and this one. And she has this whole universe. But that doesn't exist because it's a limited time marketing burst, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm very curious about this because of all the different marketing ways to leverage this. It's great. You've got 11 authors coming together and they're all just hitting and cross, maybe introducing new writers to things they probably like already based on what they're reading. But then does the limited access of it, does that propel the urgency of having to hit the buy button now?
It does.
Okay.
And it, particularly because we kind of focus our efforts on that first month to make sure that we get a nice juicy donation for the charity. Right. Then and it's a little easier sell with that charity because you're not just buying a good deal book that's not going to be here for very long, but you're doing good.
Right.
You're helping, your dollars go a little farther toward a very worthy charity.
And so this is it's about 400,000 words, right?
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's like many, well, obviously it's 11 novellas.
It is.
Which that's a lot. So it's got to be like $20 or something, right?
$4.99.
$4.99 US. Okay, so it's
$4.99
like, wow.
US, which is
Wow.
what, $6.99 Canadian, I think.
Yeah, something in that realm. So that's a steal, right? You're gonna be for the target audience. There's gonna be a lot of stuff to read. That's gonna,
Right.
for me, that'd be
Right.
20 hours of reading probably.
Yeah, and that's one of the value propositions of any anthology, I think. But it's also allows us to keep that $4.99 price, make a decent profit for the charity. Oh well, and us authors too. And because if we, in non-pandemic years, if we market it correctly, it's also let us hit the USA Today bestseller list with it. I think 3 out of the 6 have hit.
Okay.
Oh, well, I don't know if this one's going to hit. I suspect not.
Find out.
But, I could be surprised, but, marketing this year is just such a, crapshoot. Who knows? So
I'm curious then, so I know each writer, smart writers, have their own mailing list.
Yes.
Is there a mailing list of people who are just fans of the
Yes.
Pets in Space
Yes.
series? So is there a separate mailing list?
So I have a Pets in Space Books website, and you can sign up for the newsletter right there. And then I send you fun little info. Well, I have help. Send you fun little we created a playlist this year for each author guy either gave us a theme or some authors like to write with music going on, and some authors are like, silence, I need silence. But they could come up with a theme song. And in one case, Susan Smith, she wrote her own song.
Wow.
For the playlist.
Wow.
So she wrote the lyrics, she had music, she had it performed, she had a video made, and it's up there on YouTube. And so some authors
Is it possible that we could sample the song in the podcast?
Yeah, maybe.
Check with her and let me know before this goes live. I can sneak it in there.
Yes, I'm sure she would. Because it's up on YouTube, and so we Pets in Space has a YouTube channel, and we've got the playlist there, and it's right there.
Very cool. Awesome. Please do send me a link to that. I can include it in the show
I
notes.
Absolutely will.
Really cool. Awesome. Okay.
Ryan was a human girl, orphan on a far-off world. Make a life in a cosmic place. She'd do whatever it would take. Lost and lonely, scared and caged. Raya found new friends that day. Friendship grows in unexpected ways, even in worlds that are far away. When the world seems too huge and scary, we'll take a starship intergalactic ferry and escape to far-off worlds where we'll discover cosmic thrill. When the world seems too huge and scary.
So I have to ask on behalf of writers who are my audience. Anyone who's listening to this and goes, "Oh my God, this is me. I write this stuff. How do I get involved?" Is there a way that they can audition for?
Well, they can certainly write to me and say, "Here is what I do, and I would love to be part of Pets in Space. Please consider me." And I make no promises, but absolutely, I won't bite. I'm not mean.
Okay, so that's cool. So anyone listening is like, well, there's a possibility, but you've got to prove your worth to the group, right? I imagine that's
yes. And just like in all other arts kinds of things, you tend to work with people you know because you know they're reliable, you know that they're going to, you know their brand, you've read a story or more, or you're a big fan, or that kind of thing. So, that's why in films you see people working together all the time, because they're like, yes, I know that she will show up and know her lines and, not trip over the furniture.
Yeah, it is funny when you see that and you're like, well, it's a Tarantino film, therefore these actors are going to keep appearing.
Yes, Una Thurman, there she is.
Yeah, that's cool. So that leads me to think about, so how valuable was connecting with other writers and networking in your own experience as a writer?
I think that's key. I think we are not the competition. There are some people, and I think it was engendered by the traditional publishing world, who think that all other writers are their competition and that we're fighting for the same 3 readers. No, we're not. I bet your books and my books don't have a lot of crossover readers. So if I can, help you in any way, or you can help me in any way, all we're doing is helping each other.
Right.
And we're serving our readers, because to me, there is a book for every reader who wants one.
Right.
The trouble is finding it. And so if somebody's in a mood for like fun, deep horror or something like that, I can say, I know a guy.
Cool. Okay.
And so to me that, and particularly in the indie world, in the indie publishing world, we don't have the marketing reach that a traditional publisher has. Although they're losing theirs too, because of, the world is changing and stuff. Right. But our best bet is to work together. Rising tide floats all boats. And, just like the 20 Books conference thing, I think you're going to that, right?
Yeah, I'll be there in November, assuming I can get across the border.
Yeah, I'll be there too.
Excellent. So. You can chat then at the bar.
Yeah, that's right.
So I want to go back to young Carol, who was writing fan fiction in high school out of just this passion and drive to want to see some romance in the Star Trek universe, or that Carol who co-authored the first book and went, whoa, 37 copies sold, huh? What if you were talking to her today, were able to talk to her, what sort of advice would you go back and offer her?
I'd probably say stick with the writing more, because and learn how to outline a little sooner. Because I would just write, and then I'd be like, whatever happened to the plot? So I would say learn to outline a little sooner, because if you may recall back in the day when they were teaching you to write essays in school, I generally had to write the whole essay so that I could go back and turn in the outline like I was supposed to.
You and me both.
So if I could have introduced myself to the concept that outlining is actually a good thing, you just don't have to do it the way the teacher wants you to do it, but an outline is a good thing, I'd have probably been a little better off. But with Hooray for Holopticon, which is the fun story, we had to outline because there were 2 of us writing, and I'd be like, well, you're writing this chapter and I'm writing that one, right? And she's like, no, I thought I was. Oh, okay. So with the outline, then you know where you're going with that, and it's a little easier to manage. I know of pantsers who have people who just sit down and write, and they somehow end up with a story, which is magic to me. I know of people who collaborate and are pantsers. That is double magic to me, and I bow at their altar to be able to do that. I'm just not one of them. It's just magic to me. But so, and I do allow room for discovery. I'm not like there are extreme plotters who I'm like, don't you get tired of the story after you've done all those details? You could just write the encyclopedia entry and it'd be fun. But
Cool. Well, thank you for that advice and a wonderful chat. Carol, please let my listeners know, where can they find out more about you? Where can they find out more about Pets in Space?
So Pets in Space is petsinspacebooks.com, and there you will find Pets in Space 6 prominently featured, and it is on sale at all booksellers, or will be by the time this podcast goes, and you can buy a copy, and it will be a really lovely introduction to science fiction romance for a pretty decent price, and you're helping a nice charity. And me, I'm carolvannatta.com, author.carolvannatta.com, and you can find my space opera series, and I have a visual. Here's my cover of Overload Flux, the first book in my space opera series. And I have a paranormal romance series and more books coming out soon, but in good time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol.
All right. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
So I wanted to reflect on, the first thing I wanted to reflect on is a couple things. First one is the use of a particular term that was my misunderstanding when I initially was chatting with Carol about recording this conversation, and I didn't even pick up on it. And I'm also going to explain an example of how that actually, something happened to me with this exact same misunderstanding. And it's the term anthology I want to go into. Is in my, decades-long experience in the book industry, an anthology technically is usually a single volume book, which is anywhere between, let's say, 70,000 to 150,000 words, so somewhere in that range, roughly 100,000 words, let's say even, of short stories from different authors. And that is what an anthology technically is. And so, because I'm old, as I've been around for a while, that's what I'm used to. Omnibus, for example, is what you use for a book that has multiple books in it. So, for example, when I was a bookseller, the term omnibus was something, a Dean Koontz omnibus was 3 different Dean Koontz novels or 4 different Dean Koontz novels all in one, and it was like a big hardcover edition. Sometimes an omnibus paperback, the Bachman books, four novellas from Stephen King, the Bachman books. That's technically known as an omnibus. In the indie author community, we call them box sets, which are really just digital bundles, technically. But we like to call them box sets because sexy, and we think about the actual box sets, which is a little box that has the 3 books in it. So the indie author community has sort of created or reinvented words or readapted them for other uses, and they're not always in line with trad pub. And because, again, I've been around since 1992 in the book industry, I'm kind of used to some of the old school terminology, etc. So, again, when Carol mentioned the pets in space, see, I made that mistake again, pets in space. When she mentioned the Pets in Space anthology, I was like, oh, okay, an anthology of short stories. Cool. Of all the authors, probably stories from their universes, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I've edited tons of anthologies, probably at least 8 of them, where they're short stories that I've collected from different authors. And so it you can even hear in the interview, I finally go, oh wow, that's like 400,000 words. That's long. And so that was me misunderstanding it again, because it's just a different, decades of using a term a certain way, and then realizing that people mean something else from the same word. This takes me back to a little over 2.5 years ago, and a good friend of mine from the indie publishing industry that I first met at a conference. She was part of an anthology, and she said, "Hey, do you have a story for this anthology that we're curating?" And again, it was a limited time anthology of science fiction, and they wanted science fiction. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'll see if I can find something." And I grabbed a short story of mine that hadn't yet been published anywhere, so it was completely unique. It wasn't available anywhere else. I'd actually written it specifically for a different science fiction anthology, and I pulled it aside, and ended up it was accepted. It was used in the anthology, but then that anthology, like this Pets in Space anthology, I was embarrassed to learn later on. I was one of the only short stories. Everything else was at least a novella-like. Sometimes it was a full-length novel. So, and again, it was this limited time thing available on Amazon only, where you could buy it for $5.99 or whatever and get all these books. And all I had contributed to was a measly short story when everyone else was a novella. And I felt like a chump. I felt like an idiot. I mean, I felt like I wasn't holding up my end of the deal, like I wasn't offering enough. And I didn't even understand until after it was put together, because I had no idea what the other people were putting in it. So that was an embarrassing moment for me. Fortunately, my friend was so gracious and kind, and the person running the anthology was also very gracious and kind, and nobody gave me hell or anything. But I did feel embarrassed because I felt like I was letting the other writers down because of my misunderstanding. So the lesson, the reflection for that is, even if you know something and you've worked in an industry for a long time, the people you're talking to may not be following the same definition as you. So it's always best to double or triple check so that you don't have that misunderstanding, because here I thought I knew what I was doing. And because I was operating with all indie authors, I did not make the connection that it was a different terminology. So I wasn't attending to that, and that's on me, not on them. It's on me. So I need to take ownership for that and understand that words can have different meanings. Yay! I know that's an interesting thing. I was going to share a dad joke about that too, because recently shared this dad joke on. I guess it was on TikTok as well as on Instagram, and maybe even on my chalkboard outside. But in the UK, they call them lifts, and in North America, we call them elevators. And I guess that's because we're raised differently over here. So, okay, silly dad joke. Anyways, the second thing I wanted to reflect on, and it goes back to these anthologies specifically, both the one that I let down the other authors on, as well as this one that Carol's talking about, and it is the absolute power when authors can work together and collaborate. It is so meaningful. So Pets in Space, you've got the themes, you've got all of these authors writing with content and themes that are going to very likely resonate with one another. And when they do this, it's a very powerful and concerted effort. 11 different authors sharing other authors and stories that they know are going to resonate with their readers. And that is huge, and that is powerful. And along those lines, it was after listening to this interview with Carol that I actually finally got off my butt and went into the book funnel. But there's a really lesser known thing at book funnel, which are authors wanting to collaborate and share things like this. Like, hey, do you have a freebie that I can give out in my newsletter? And I'll give you a freebie you can give out in your newsletter. If it's in the right genre, maybe it's just a great offering for your readers. And so I finally submitted and was accepted to be in this bundle. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I will share that in a future episode just so you can let you know how it is. And of course, I will share with you, dear listeners, how it worked. Like, how did this particular one work, and how was it arranged, and who's involved in it, et cetera, because I do strongly believe that authors collaborating and holding one another up, like Carol says, they're not competing with one another, they're supporting one another. That is the way of the future, and that is how I believe publishing will continue to grow and expand. Heck, it's even something I said towards the end of my interview on that 6-figure podcast that I mentioned earlier. But that's it for my reflection. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. If you want to support the podcast, you can leave a review for this on the podcatcher of your choice. Yes, reviews do make a significant difference in helping other people find the podcast. Speaking of which, you want to help share this podcast with someone that you think would find value in the Stark Reflections and even some of the ramblings and silliness and the helium voice that I had earlier on. You can also support the podcast over at patreon.com, and a huge, huge thank you to all my supporters who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections, where for $1, $3 or $5 a month, you get access to additional bonus content, including at the second and third level, access to the podcast, the audio podcast, the additional Stark Reflections on other podcasts, and additional bonus audio content that goes in that automated RSS feed. And a huge, huge thank you to my small but powerful patrons who do support the podcast. But thank you all of you, dear listeners, patrons and listeners alike. If this is your first episode, hey, let me know where you can comment at the show notes over at starkreflections.ca. You can even comment and say, well, this is my first and last episode, and here's why. Because, hey, that'll help me improve. What did I do wrong? What could I have done better to keep you listening to this podcast? Because your attention is so dear to me, dear listener. So thank you so much for listening. This is the end of the podcast. So until next weekend, next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.